will get started here. So thank you all for being here today for our presentation. This is Ask the Historians. This is our virtual program that we do from Oak Park River Forest Museum every last Friday of the month. And we cover topics that are questions people send to us or frequently asked questions that we get here at the museum, and all different varieties of subject matter that have to do with Oak Park and River Forest. So today we will be talking about one of Oak Park's most beloved children and her origins of how she was born and started off life in Oak Park. And so with that, I am going to introduce our first speaker for the day, who is the Executive Director of Oak Park River Forest Museum. So I'd like to introduce Frank Lipo.
Thanks, Rachel. And can you see me?
Yes.
Okay, great. My pleasure. It's my pleasure this morning to speak to you. I do realize that we're especially happy to be doing this virtual program on a snowy morning in January in Chicago. So it's nice to know that you're all comfortably warm and inside and not traipsing your way to the museum through the snow. I wanted to start out very specifically with this question, and going to the actual question of for Ask the Historian today is Betty White really an Oak Parker? Where did she actually live? Okay, so when you think about this question, when I was hired at the Historical Society as executive director, nobody specifically asked me, nor have they ever since, to be the official arbiter of every local person. Are you really an Oak Parker or a River Forester? It seems to have come up a lot with Betty White because she was here relatively briefly, whether or not she's a true Oak Parker. So I'll sort of double back to that question later. But let's be very literal. Looking on my phone, or you can reach back and grab a paper copy of a dictionary off the shelf, and you'll see the definition of native: a person born in a specified place or associated with a place by birth, whether subsequently resident there or not. So the whole idea of somebody being a native, and Betty White is a native, she was born here in Oak Park. And what I wanted to talk about today is sort of the backstory, is how somebody ends up being born in a place. Of course, those of you who've lived in a lot of different places, there's a lot of different reasons why somebody ends up in a place. And some people, of course, are associated with a community from birth to death, or have done all of their important life's work in a place. And so they're really uber local people and uber natives. But so Betty's a little bit different story. So let's talk about that. I really do think that all history is ultimately family history. The parents, extended families, close friends, and communities that shape us. So it's not just a question of being sort of the sort of political history of a particular person. It's very much your family, right? Like, why did you end up in a certain place? And so I wanted to sort of trace that a little more genealogy, and I was assisted in some of this work with Kurt Etchingham, who I think he might be on the call today, wonderful volunteer, board member, vice president of the Historical Society. What were the family stories that got her here, and what brought her back as a child and a young adult to Oak Park? Let's start with her parents. Betty's parents were born in 1899, just like Oak Park's legends, Percy Julian and Ernest Hemingway. Of course, Dr. Julian had roots in Alabama for a couple generations before that, and unfortunately, as members of his family being enslaved. And also Hemingway's family roots, born in Oak Park in 1899. All of his both sides of his family were Oak Parkers going back. So there's a real tie to our area. All of Betty's grandparents were first-generation immigrants. Betty's father was Horace White, and her mother was Catherine Catechis, who went by Tess or Tessie. Horace and his sister Emma were born in the Upper Peninsula of Michigan to Danish immigrants, Christopher and Etta. later moving to Green Bay. So they were sort of upper Midwest folks after they came to the United States. Tessa's parents were Greek immigrant Nick Katrikis and Canadian native Margaret Hobbs, who met and married in Chicago. So as immigrants, they came either to the upper Midwest or sort of came to Chicago or came to Chicago later. By 1918, when Betty's dad, Horace, joined the Army to serve in World War I, his family lived at 704 North Central in Chicago, just south of Chicago Avenue. By that point, the Katrikis family lived at 4110 Washington Boulevard, just west of Pulaski and within a short walk of Garfield Park. So you really have her parents, in both of their families being sort of West Siders, sort of Garfield Park, Austin residents. So that's the backstory to Betty being born in Oak Park, is that her parents were from the West Side. So even though her dad served in World War I, you won't find him on the World War I Memorial, the Peace Memorial, Peace Triumphant as it's known in Scoble Park. We don't also know, and of course all this could be researched more as we have so many great researchers even on this call today, we don't know the details of the courtship though. But as West Siders, Tess Katrikis and Horace White, who were only 22 years old, were married on February 19th, 1921 in Chicago, and they chose an apartment in Oak Park at 220 Pleasant to be their first home together. So if you turn the, well, there's, of course, this month we had the celebration there in front of the Lake Theater, 220 Pleasant Street. So here's an image, a little bit hard to see there, but it's still there. Drive by the corner of Pleasant and Harvey. You'll see in publications of the time, the phone book in a city directory from right around this era. They're listed as either 218 or 220 Pleasant, kind of two entrances to the same building. So they lived there in an apartment or maybe two different apartments in that building after their marriage and when Betty was born. 11 months later, Betty was born. And after that eventful couple years being married and having their first child, and what turned out to be their only child, Horace and Tess White moved to California. Her father was a salesman of industrial electronic parts. Chicago was strong manufacturing base then, and of course, California with a lot of the growth in the industries, sort of in the 20s and 30s. That was a great place to work as an electronic salesman of electronic parts. But, and here's where it gets a little bit trickier historically, is her parents' family still lived on the West Side. And a few years later, they moved to Oak Park. So I'll get to the questions later. I see there's a question in the chat box. The Oak Park connection doesn't end there because Betty's dad, Horace, had one sibling, Emma, and that sister married a guy named Hugh James. Emma and her husband, Hugh, lived with her parents in Austin at the time Betty and her parents had gone to California. A few years later, in 1926, Betty's aunt and uncle bought the house at 214 North Taylor in Oak Park. And if we turn to the next slide, you'll see an image of that house. So there it is, 214 North Taylor. Her parents, her aunt and uncle, Emma and Hugh James, bought that house. It looks like in 1926 is the best we can figure. And within a few years, her parents, the Whites, moved in with them. So both Betty's grandparents and her aunt and uncle lived in this house. And essentially from, say, 1926 all the way till her uncle was the last to die in 1965. So for about 40 years, Betty White's, first her grandparents and aunt and uncle, and later on her grandparents first died late 30s, early 40s, and then her aunt died, and then her uncle lived all the way until 1965. So this house was really closely tied to the extended family, and they were an extended family, close family. They lived together, two generations, and so they had these sort of deep 40-year roots involved in a number of things in the community. So neighbors in that block, people who lived in Oak Park, kind of knew of this Betty White connection, that her, extended family was from Oak Park and she had been born here. So I think some of I never believed too much social media buzz, but some people seemed almost offended that Betty White's story was being celebrated. She's not enough of an Oak Parker, but she felt a real strong tie to the community. And if we go to the next slide, my predecessor, Carol Helm, wrote a letter. Unfortunately, when Betty responded, she misspelled Carol Helm, but Carol had inquired in 1989 what her ties were exactly, trying to clarify this. And you can see this response just about a month, not even a month after Carol sent the inquiry. And this is a very personal reply. Some stuff's come out at the time of Betty's death on December 31st that she was very responsive and had really worked to keep in touch with fans. She responded very quickly. And it's a little bit hard to read here, but in essence, she talks about living that she thought, it turns out that I think she's mistaken, but she thought that she had been born on that house on Taylor. And part of the reason she's thought that is that she came back to visit her aunt, uncle, and grandparents, and sort of has fond memories from what's in this letter. And I'm sort of hypothesizing a little bit, but I think her parents and people just said, "Oh, you were born in Oak Park. Let's go and visit the family home." And so she just sort of conflated those two, because there's no way she could have lived in that house on Taylor, or she could have been born in that house on Taylor, because the family didn't own it until a few years after she was born. So this gives you a sense of that connection that she's writing proudly and kind of responsibly. It's sort of like, I think a lot of us have, maybe not all of us, but a lot of us have, the place you visit your grandparents or a favorite aunt or uncle. It's a real family home that you really associate with your childhood and extended family. The PS is funny. I shared it at the event at Lake Theater when I was giving similar remarks, is I've always, PS, she says, I'm always careful to, this is literally what she said, PS, I'm always careful to explain that I was born in Oak Park, not Chicago. So she sort of had this sense of, I'm a native of Oak Park. I was born there. I had this extended family in Oak Park. And I think, of course, this kind of question that we get at the Historical Society over time, yes, there's people who've lived here their whole lives and did some interesting things, and they're true Oak Parkers in every way and went to all the local schools, etc. And then there's some of these famous folks, maybe they moved here as an adult and raised their own families here. Maybe they were here relatively briefly. But I think Betty White's such a sort of iconic figure, had such a long and productive life and multiple chapters to her career, that I think a lot of people in Oak Park sort of seized upon that as being such a fun and sort of happy connection here during our pandemic times. And I think a lot of people really enjoyed that celebration a couple of weekends ago in front of Lake Theater, because it was a chance to just sort of enjoy the legacy and the connection to the community. And then I'm going to turn it over to Rachel.
Okay, thank you very much. So I will expand a little bit on the event that happened a couple of weekends ago in Oak Park. As Frank is mentioning, the Wednesday Journal especially sort of spearheaded an event that took place in front of the Lake Theater all along Lake Street there on January 15th. And that was to commemorate Betty White's 100th birthday, which would have been January 17th. So they had an event, and a lot of different local organizations and businesses and groups got together to really put on a pretty spectacular event. And that actually got nationwide coverage that was happening. So, and a special thank you I want to say to our own Frank Lipo, because he shared some of these remarks that day as well. So we were able to share some of this history with the crowd that was there, and I watched it on live stream. So, and that is also available on YouTube to watch the actual event as well. So you can see on the screen here, I have a picture from the Village of Oak Park that covers only some of the crowd that was there that day, and including a very standout figure sort of prop that you see along the right side of the picture, which you also see over my right shoulder. So that is what I am going to be mentioning here, is that we actually got an artifact from this very event. So I got in touch with Anne Farrell, who thank you very much is on the call today as well. And she reached out to us and said, I have this that I brought with me to the event, and would you like to have it for the museum? So I asked Anne a little bit more about where she got it, and what she was thinking as she was thinking about bringing this sort of thing to the event. So I want to share just a statement that she sent to me as well. So Anne responded to my questions, my inquiry about tell me, my usual thing when people offer to donate us things is tell me more about it. So her response to that question was, it's been such a dark time with COVID and personal losses and things. I thought really hard about the spirit of Betty White, what she brought to the planet: love, laughter, caring for animals, etc. So that is sort of the heart of why she was thinking of making such a bold statement at the celebration. And I think really why this celebration took place is that even though Betty White lived here for a very short time and had sort of a stringed connection to Oak Park, her legacy is really something to hold on to and think about. And so this artifact here behind me not only talks about her and her history with the community, but also this event that really represents a good sense of our community and how we come together to celebrate these really good ideas. So that is a little bit about our newest artifact to the museum. And with that, I will end my presentation. I want to invite anyone who wants to ask questions. Feel free to put those in the chat box. And I'll get started here with one question that we have from Joan. So I'd like to,
Rachel?
Yes.
Yeah, I can jump back in on that one. And then I'm going to say this too, as just to emphasize what Rachel just said. If you have any questions, of course, put them in the chat box. The questions there right now are ones about from Joan Bledig. Thank you, Joan, who might be thinking, as her love of Edgar Rice Burroughs and Tarzan, another sort of famous Oak Parker, again, who came here as an adult, came here as a man to raise his family, but had a very productive period of time here in Oak Park. So the different sort of aspects of like famous people who are associated with the community, there's such a nice spectrum, I think. And she was asking about the addresses in Chicago. Early on in the 19th century, there was an earlier numbering system or different numbering systems, but the addresses I gave were the contemporary system. If Kurt Effingham is still on, he might put in the chat box something different, but these addresses are after the numbering change. So here, because that was the 20s, and so it's much later. So the current numbering system was in fact there. Gary, stickler for details, and he's correct in this entirely, as he often is on these details, is back in later on, he became sort of an electronic part salesman. And I sort of was combining the history there. He was a salesman broadly in a couple different manufacturing lines, some of which became sort of electronic. They are using electronic technology when that was used later. So when people sort of summarize his life, he was a very successful salesman apparently, but Chicago obviously was a much bigger and more important manufacturing center than California was, but some industry and some fields were starting to navigate or gravitate, I should say, out there. So I don't know the company, and Gary, he worked for a series of companies, but that's something that I can share with you. I can look at double check on some of the things I checked, and as I mentioned, Kurt Effingham also did a little checking on this, have some names of the companies which you'd be interested in, but I just don't know offhand. It was a lot to focus on Betty and make sure we could get some of those stories straight. So, but we'll follow up on that with you, Gary. Other questions, Rachel, if you want to jump into the box, if there's something
I don't see any other questions at the moment, so I put up our email address and our website on the screen here if you have questions after today's program. And I would like to invite everybody to be on the lookout for some of our other upcoming programs. We have one on February 12th that is scheduled to be here at the museum. And that is going to be a program with local author I-Jen Poo, who will be talking about her book, The Age of Dignity. And she is a very fascinating woman who has done a lot with recent politics and research on the growing community of aging and all different sorts of topics. So I think it's going to be very interesting, and I hope that you all will take a look at that and join us if you can. And then we will be scheduling our other virtual programs. We have 2 every month, and we have Ask the Historians, which is this on the last Friday of every month. And we also have Inside OPRF Museum, which is the 3rd Thursday. And so we'll be scheduling those. Take a look on our website for the topics for those. And if that seems like everybody's questions today, then I think I will thank Frank, especially for all of his research, and Kurt Etchingham as well, all of your research in putting together this really fantastic nailing down facts about Betty's life here in Oak Park. And thank you all for joining and for your continued interest in our programs here. So I will see you all next time.